They called it the final session for a reason. After 3,000 years of galactic civilization, the Galactic Council had never once been forced to dissolve itself. Wars had been fought, species had risen and fallen, entire star systems had been consumed by black holes, yet the Council endured. But, today, in the gleaming halls of Station Nexus Prime, something unprecedented was about to happen. The youngest species in known space, barely 2 centuries since their first stumbling steps into the void, had just done the impossible. Humanity had found a way to break the one law that held the galaxy together. The law that kept 1 trillion beings from tearing each other apart. The law that even the mighty Vorthan Empire, with their reality-bending technology, dared not challenge. And, now, as emergency alarms echoed through corridors that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations, every delegate in the chamber knew that whatever the humans said next would either save the galaxy, or damn it forever. The final session was about to begin. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the assembled might of the Galactic Council, her human heartbeat the only sound she could hear above the deathly silence that filled the vast chamber. 3,000 delegates representing every known sapient species in the galaxy stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension, charged particles dancing in the artificial atmosphere like invisible lightning. The council chamber was a marvel that defied physics itself. Suspended in the zero-gravity heart of Station Nexus Prime, it existed as a perfect sphere nearly a kilometer in diameter. The walls were transparent aluminum infused with quantum processors that could translate not just languages, but thoughts, emotions, and concepts between species so alien that some communicated through controlled bursts of radiation while others spoke in mathematical equations that rewrote reality. Elena had been to this chamber twice before, both times as a junior aide accompanying more senior diplomats. Now she stood alone at its center, representing not just Earth or the Sol system, but all of humanity in what everyone knew would be the most important session in galactic history. The irony wasn't lost on her that the youngest member species of the Council might be delivering its death sentence. High Counselor Thexmari of the ancient Kytherian collective floated above the assembly, her crystalline form pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed barely contained fury. The Kytherians were older than most stars in this arm of the galaxy, and they had never been challenged in the way humanity had just challenged them. Her voice, when it came, resonated through every translation matrix in the chamber with harmonic frequencies that made several of the more sensitive species physically recoil. Ambassador Vasquez, Thexmari's words carried the weight of millennia. Your species has committed an act so unprecedented, so fundamentally destructive to the order we have maintained for 3,000 standard years, that many of my colleagues question whether humanity deserves to continue existing at all. Elena felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Behind the High Counselor, she could see the emergency display screens showing real-time feeds from across the galaxy. Entire fleets were mobilizing. The Vorthan Empire's reality shaper ships were powering up their consciousness-altering weapons. The silicon-based architects were already beginning to construct planet-sized defensive structures around their core worlds. Even the peaceful melody weavers had gone silent, their beautiful songs that normally echoed through subspace now replaced by an ominous quiet that made experienced spacers nervous. I understand the Council's concern, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The translation systems carried her words to every corner of the chamber, rendering them in chemical signatures, electromagnetic pulses, gravitational waves, and forms of communication that humans didn't even have names for. But perhaps it would help if we examined exactly what humanity has done, and, more importantly, why we did it. A sound like grinding asteroids came from the section occupied by the Titanite assembly, massive beings of living stone who measured their thoughts in geological time. Elder granite that endures, ancient beyond measure, slowly raised what might charitably be called a hand. When he spoke, his words arrived with the patience of continental drift. The humans, he rumbled, each word taking several seconds to complete, have violated the prime constraint. The law that prevents any species from achieving true unity of purpose. The law that ensures balance, prevents any one civilization from dominating all others. His rocky features shifted in what might have been an expression of profound disappointment. They have eliminated war. Not just between their nations, not just on their worlds, but war itself. They have created a condition that was deemed impossible by every theoretical framework we possess. Elena nodded slowly. This was the heart of it, the reason why fleets were mobilizing and why some species were already discussing the previously unthinkable option of sterilizing human space entirely. The Galactic Council had been built on a fundamental assumption that had held true for 3 millennia: no species could ever achieve perfect internal harmony. There would always be conflicts, always be competing factions, always be some form of division that prevented any civilization from acting with truly unified will. This wasn't cruelty or some cosmic joke. It was practical necessity. The galaxy was vast beyond imagination, containing resources that could theoretically support quadrillions of beings across millions of worlds. But it wasn't infinite. There were bottlenecks, choke points, unique phenomena that could only be controlled by one species at a time. The famous An-Romanian nexus gates that allowed instantaneous travel across galactic distances. The consciousness amplification fields around ancient black holes that could boost a species' collective intelligence by orders of magnitude. The time dilution zones where centuries of research could be completed in days. If any species ever achieved true unity, they could claim all these resources simultaneously. They would have no internal conflicts to distract them, no competing interests to negotiate between. They would expand across the galaxy like a perfectly coordinated organism, not out of malice, but simply because unified action was inherently more efficient than divided action. The mathematics were undeniable. So the Council had been built around managing this impossibility. Every species was guaranteed certain fundamental rights and territories, but always with the understanding that they could never act as a truly unified whole. Wars, political divisions, competing philosophies, resource conflicts, even carefully managed genocides were all acceptable as long as they served the greater purpose of preventing any civilization from becoming too unified, too focused, too dangerous. Ambassador Zithkri of the Swarmline Coalition leaned forward, her insectoid features clicking with nervous energy. The coalition was perhaps the closest any species had come to true unity, but even they maintained carefully cultivated subcastes with competing interests. Your species numbered barely 12 billion beings when you joined the Council, she chittered, her words accompanied by pheromone clouds that the translation systems rendered as emotional undertones. You had dozens of nation-states, competing ideologies, active warfare on multiple continents. You were perfectly normal, perfectly safe. What changed? Elena had been expecting this question. She had spent months preparing for it, studying every aspect of humanity's transformation, interviewing the key figures involved, analyzing the data until she understood it better than anyone except perhaps the original architects of what some were calling the Great Convergence. We learned something, Elena said simply. Something that changed everything. The chamber fell even quieter, if such a thing were possible. Elena could feel the attention of every being present focused on her like a physical weight. In the diplomatic galleries that surrounded the main chamber, she knew that emergency sessions were being held by every major alliance and power block in the galaxy. Her next words might determine whether humanity survived the week. 57 years ago, Elena continued, our scientists made a discovery while studying quantum consciousness interactions in our own neural networks. They found that human consciousness wasn't actually individual at all. Every human brain exists in a state of quantum entanglement with every other human brain. We are, and always have been, a collective consciousness that believed it was composed of individuals. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the chamber erupted in sounds that the translation systems couldn't even begin to interpret. The Vorthan delegates' reality shaper implants began glowing with dangerous energy. Several of the more paranoid species immediately activated emergency broadcast systems to warn their home governments that humanity might be even more dangerous than previously calculated. Elena waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. We spent decades studying this phenomenon, trying to understand its implications. The quantum entanglement was subtle, hidden beneath layers of neurological noise and individual personality development. Most humans lived their entire lives without ever consciously accessing it. But, once we understood it existed, we began to learn how to use it. High Counselor Thexmari's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that conveyed deep unease. You speak of fundamental alterations to your species' neural architecture. Such modifications are restricted under 17 different council protocols, specifically to prevent the kind of unity you describe. We didn't modify anything, Elena replied calmly. We simply learned to access what was already there. Like learning to use muscles you didn't know you had. The potential for unity was built into humanity from the beginning. We just needed to understand it. The implications were staggering, and Elena could see the delegates beginning to grasp them. If humanity had always possessed this capability, then every assumption about their safe integration into galactic society had been wrong from the beginning. They weren't a typical species that could be relied upon to maintain internal conflicts. They were a species-wide collective consciousness that had spent millennia fragmented through ignorance, but could potentially reunify at any moment. Elder Granite that endures spoke again, his words even slower than usual as he processed this information with the deliberation of geological time. The theoretical models, he rumbled, suggest that a truly unified humanity would expand across the galaxy within centuries. Not through aggression, but through simple efficiency. You would outcompete every other species for resources, territory, influence. The mathematical projections are catastrophic for galactic diversity. Elena nodded. She had seen those same projections. They were terrifying in their implications, not because they showed humanity as aggressive conquerors, but because they showed unified humanity as simply more effective than any divided species could possibly be. It was like comparing a single organism to a committee. Individual humans might be no more intelligent or capable than individual members of other species, but 12 billion minds working in perfect coordination could accomplish things that no divided civilization could match. That brings us to the question that has prompted this emergency session, Elena said. What does humanity intend to do with this capability? The chamber fell silent again. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment that would determine whether the session ended with diplomatic solutions or with the galaxy's first species-wide extermination order in over 1,000 years. Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would echo through history regardless of how long any of them lived to remember them. To understand our intentions, the Council needs to understand exactly what we learned when we achieved unity. It wasn't just that we could think as one mind. It was what that one mind immediately understood about the universe that individual minds had missed. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces and forms that represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Ancient species that had built wonders spanning star systems. Collective intelligences that had solved the fundamental equations of reality. Beings that had transcended physical form entirely and existed as pure consciousness woven into the fabric of spacetime itself. We learned, Elena said quietly, that every species in this galaxy is making the same mistake humanity made for millennia. You think you're separate. You think you're individual civilizations competing for limited resources. But you're not. The silence that followed these words was different from before. It wasn't the quiet of anticipation or fear. It was the quiet of minds struggling to process a concept that challenged their most fundamental assumptions about reality itself. Elena smiled, and, for the first time since entering the chamber, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. The galaxy itself is conscious. Every sapient mind in it, from the smallest individual to the largest collective, is part of a single, vast intelligence that has been trying to understand itself for millions of years. The conflicts between species, the competition for resources, the wars and alliances and diplomatic negotiations, they're all part of the same process that individual humans went through before we learned to access our quantum entanglement. The reaction this time was different. Instead of explosive protest, there was a spreading silence as delegates began to understand the implications of what they were hearing. Elena could see the moment when comprehension dawned on different species, marked by subtle changes in posture, color, electromagnetic emissions, or gravitational fluctuations depending on their nature. The discovery that led to human unity, Elena continued, wasn't just about human consciousness. It was about consciousness itself. The same quantum entanglement that links human minds links all minds. Every sapient being in the galaxy is part of the same vast network of consciousness. We're not competing species fighting over limited resources. We're neurons in the same cosmic brain, trying to remember how to think as one. High Counselor Thexmari's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to colors that conveyed profound thoughtfulness. "If your hypothesis is correct," she said slowly, "then, the very structure of our civilization, the Council itself, the laws we've built to prevent species unity, they're all symptoms of the same fragmentation that kept humanity divided for millennia," Elena finished. "The Council exists to manage conflicts between species because we believed we were separate species. But, what if we're not? What if we're all part of the same consciousness, artificially divided by the same kind of neurological noise that made individual humans believe they were separate minds?" The chamber was completely silent now. Elena could feel the weight of 3,000 of the galaxy's greatest minds focusing on the implications of her words. Some were already beginning to run preliminary calculations. Others were accessing their species' deepest archives, looking for evidence that might support or contradict this impossible theory. Elena knew she had their attention now, but she also knew that attention could turn to fear or anger if she handled the next part poorly. Everything depended on helping them understand that unity didn't mean extinction for individual species or cultures. "This is why humanity chose not to expand aggressively when we achieved unity," she said. "We realized that our role wasn't to dominate the galaxy, but to help other species discover the same truth we had found. The universe doesn't need human hegemony. It needs all of us working together as the single consciousness we've always been." As Elena finished speaking, she could feel something shifting in the chamber. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but undeniable. For just a moment, the minds of 3,000 delegates from across the galaxy seemed to pulse in harmony, like neurons firing in sequence. The moment passed quickly, but everyone had felt it. The galaxy's long journey toward remembering itself had begun. The moment of harmony passed, but its effects rippled through the chamber like waves through still water. Elena watched as delegates turned to each other with expressions of wonder and confusion. Some species that had been enemies for centuries were looking at each other with something approaching recognition. Others were retreating into themselves, their forms shifting defensive patterns as they tried to process what they had just experienced. Commander Veltar of the Hegemony Guard, the Council's military enforcement arm, stepped forward with movements that betrayed his unease. His species, the Kelthari, had evolved from apex predators and their entire culture was built around concepts of dominance and submission. The idea that his enemies might actually be extensions of his own consciousness was clearly causing him significant distress. "Ambassador Vasquez," he growled, his translated words carrying undertones of barely controlled aggression, "what you describe sounds remarkably like the justification every would-be galactic conqueror has used throughout history. We are all one people. We must unite under my leadership for the greater good." The Vorthan Empire used similar rhetoric during the Consciousness Wars. The Silicon Collective claimed they were liberating organic minds from the illusion of individuality. How do we know this isn't simply humanity's version of the same ancient lie? Elena had expected this challenge. The galaxy's history was littered with species that had attempted universal conquest under the banner of unity or enlightenment. The difference was crucial, and she needed to make it clear before fear and suspicion could take root. "Because," Elena replied, "we're not asking anyone to submit to human authority. We're not claiming that humanity should lead this unity. In fact, our research suggests that trying to force unity from the outside is impossible. Each species, each individual consciousness, has to discover the connection for themselves." She gestured toward the chamber's central display system, which immediately came alive with holographic representations of neural networks, quantum field equations, and consciousness mapping diagrams that had taken humanity decades to develop. "The quantum entanglement we discovered doesn't create hierarchy," Elena explained as the display showed the intricate web of connections between different types of consciousness. "It creates network effects. When human minds learned to synchronize, we didn't become a hive mind with a single controlling intelligence. We became something more like a symphony, where every individual consciousness contributes its unique voice to a larger harmony." The display shifted to show recordings from Earth, images of human cities and colonies where billions of people went about their daily lives with obvious individual agency, but with a coordination and efficiency that seemed almost miraculous. Traffic flowed without control systems. Resources were distributed without bureaucracy. Conflicts were resolved before they could escalate into violence, not through suppression, but through genuine understanding and compromise. Dr. Zethmore of the Analytical Collective, a species of living mathematics that existed as patterns in crystalline matrices, pulsed with calculations as she processed the data. The efficiency metrics are unprecedented, she admitted, her words forming as shifting geometric patterns in the air. But efficiency can be achieved through many means. The Borg consciousness achieved similar coordination through forced assimilation. The Overmind Directive accomplished comparable resource distribution through population control and neural conditioning. What evidence do we have that human unity is fundamentally different? Elena smiled at the question, because this was where humanity's discovery became truly revolutionary. Because we can prove that consciousness is conserved, she said. When humans synchronize through quantum entanglement, we don't lose individual identity. We gain access to collective identity in addition to personal identity. Every human can still think private thoughts, make individual decisions, pursue personal goals. But we can also think collective thoughts when we choose to. The implications of this statement sent another wave of reaction through the chamber. Several delegates were already accessing their species' scientific databases, searching for any previous research that might support or contradict this claim. Elena continued, "This is why we believe the same potential exists for all conscious beings. Consciousness isn't a limited resource that gets divided among individuals. It's more like a field that individual minds can access at different levels. The quantum entanglement allows access to deeper levels of the field without reducing access to the individual levels." High Counselor Thexmari's pattern shifted to colors indicating deep skepticism. "Even if we accept your theoretical framework," she said, "the practical implications remain unchanged. A unified humanity, regardless of its internal structure, would still possess advantages that could destabilize the entire galactic order. Your population growth rates have increased 30% since achieving unity. Your technological advancement has accelerated exponentially. Your expansion into new star systems has tripled in the past decade alone." Elena nodded. "All of that is true. But consider why we've been expanding. Not to claim territory from other species, but to create buffer zones. Every new human colony has been established in uninhabited systems, often in regions other species considered too dangerous or resource poor to be worth claiming." She gestured again, and the display system showed a three-dimensional map of human expansion over the past 50 years. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone familiar with galactic politics. Instead of expanding toward the richest, most contested regions of space, humanity had been spreading into the gaps, the forgotten corners, the dangerous frontier regions that other species avoided. "We've been preparing," Elena explained. "Not for conquest, but for what we knew would eventually happen. The discovery of unity. The moment when other species would face the same choice humanity faced 50 years ago." Ambassador Crixtal of the Voidwalkers, beings of pure energy who existed in the space between stars, flickered with patterns indicating intense curiosity. "You speak as though this transformation is inevitable. As though every species will eventually discover the same unity that humanity has found. What evidence supports this assumption?" Elena's expression grew serious. "Because it's already happening. The moment of harmony you all felt a few minutes ago wasn't caused by anything humans did. We didn't project our consciousness or attempt to influence your minds in any way. That synchronization occurred spontaneously because the quantum entanglement that links all consciousness responded to the focused attention of this assembly." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Elena could see delegates reviewing their own memories of that moment, analyzing what they had experienced, trying to understand its implications. Dr. Zethmore's crystalline form pulsed with rapid calculations. "If spontaneous synchronization is possible," she said slowly, "then the theoretical barriers we assumed prevented species unity may not exist at all. The mathematical models that predicted stable galactic civilization required persistent internal conflicts to prevent any species from achieving overwhelming advantage. But if unity is inevitable, then our entire civilization is built on a false assumption," Elena finished. "The Council exists to manage conflicts between species that were never actually separate to begin with. The laws, the territories, the careful balance of power, they're all based on the belief that consciousness is fundamentally divided. But what if it's not? Elder Granite that endures had been silent for nearly an hour, processing information with the geological patience of his species. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of deep consideration. The humans, he rumbled, may have discovered something that changes the nature of existence itself. If consciousness is truly unified at the quantum level, then every war, every diplomatic crisis, every territorial dispute in galactic history has been an internal conflict within a single vast mind that had forgotten its own nature. The weight of this possibility settled over the chamber like a physical presence. Delegates were beginning to whisper among themselves, their conversations creating a complex harmony of different languages and communication methods. The translation systems were working at maximum capacity, trying to keep up with hundreds of simultaneous discussions about concepts that had no precedent in galactic history. Elena raised her hand for attention, and, gradually the chamber quieted. This brings us to why humanity requested this emergency session. We didn't achieve unity to gain advantage over other species. We achieved unity to prepare for what we knew was coming. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces and forms representing the accumulated wisdom of galactic civilization. The spontaneous synchronization you experience today is just the beginning. Our research suggests that once a critical mass of consciousness begins to remember its unified nature, the process accelerates exponentially. Other species are already beginning to show signs of the same awakening humanity experienced 50 years ago. Commander Veltar's aggressive posture had shifted to something more like wariness. What kind of signs? Elena accessed her diplomatic files, displaying a series of reports and data compilations that humanity had been tracking across the galaxy. The Vorthan Empire has been experiencing unprecedented levels of cooperation between previously competing noble houses. The Silicon Collective has begun demonstrating coordinated behaviors that suggest communication beyond their known technological capabilities. Even the Melody Weavers have been singing in harmonies that span multiple star systems simultaneously, which should be impossible given the speed of light limitations. The evidence was extensive and undeniable. Across the galaxy, dozens of species were beginning to exhibit behaviors that suggested some level of consciousness synchronization. Most were attributing these changes to improved technology, better communication systems, or fortunate political developments. But the pattern was consistent with the early stages of unity awakening. Ambassador Zithkri clicked nervously. If this process is truly inevitable, then every assumption about galactic stability is incorrect. The balance of power, the territorial agreements, the resource distribution systems, they're all based on the premise that species will remain fundamentally divided. Elena nodded. That's exactly why humanity requested this session. We're not trying to convince anyone to change. We're trying to help everyone prepare for changes that are already happening. The galaxy is waking up to its own unified nature, and that process is going to transform every aspect of our civilization whether we're ready for it or not. High Counselor Thexmari's bioluminescent patterns had settled into colors indicating deep contemplation. You're suggesting that the Council itself may become obsolete. If species unity is inevitable, then the entire framework of interspecies diplomacy will need to be reconsidered. Not obsolete, Elena replied. Transformed. The Council has been humanity's template for understanding how conscious unity might work on a galactic scale. Different species contributing their unique perspectives and capabilities to collective decisions. The structure is already there, it just needs to evolve from managing conflicts between separate entities to coordinating the awakening of a single cosmic consciousness. The idea was staggering in scope, but Elena could see some delegates beginning to grasp its potential. Instead of competing species fighting over limited resources, the galaxy could become a coordinated effort to understand and explore the universe. Instead of wars and territorial disputes, there could be symphony-like coordination between different types of consciousness, each contributing its unique capabilities to larger goals. But she could also see the fear in others. Species that had built their entire identity around competition, dominance, or independence were struggling with concepts that challenged everything they understood about existence. Dr. Zethmore pulsed with complex calculations. The mathematics are interesting. If consciousness unity operates as you describe, then, the combined intellectual capacity of a unified galactic civilization would be orders of magnitude greater than the sum of its individual species. The technological and scientific advancement would be unprecedented. Elena smiled. That's just the beginning. A unified galactic consciousness wouldn't just be more intelligent than individual species. It would be capable of types of thinking that individual minds can't even conceive. Humanity has only achieved unity within our own species, but we've already discovered capabilities and perspectives that were impossible when we were fragmented. A galaxy-wide unity would represent a form of consciousness that's never existed before in the universe. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated this possibility. The idea of participating in a form of consciousness that transcended anything in known history was both thrilling and terrifying. Elena knew she was approaching the crucial moment of her presentation. Everything so far had been preparation for what came next. The real reason humanity had requested this emergency session, and the choice that every species in the galaxy would soon have to make. Which brings us, Elena said quietly, to humanity's proposal for how the galaxy should handle this transformation. The weight of expectation in the chamber was almost tangible as Elena prepared to reveal humanity's proposal. She could feel the focused attention of 3,000 of the galaxy's greatest minds, representatives of civilizations that had endured for millennia, all waiting to understand how their universe was about to change. Elena took a breath and activated the chamber's central holographic display. Instead of showing technical diagrams or statistical analyses, the display filled with something far simpler and more profound: images of Earth itself. Not the gleaming cities or impressive technological achievements, but quiet scenes of daily life. Humans working together in gardens. Children learning from elders. Communities gathering to share stories and meals. Simple moments that somehow conveyed a sense of deep contentment and harmony. Before I explain our proposal, Elena began, I need you to understand what unity actually feels like from the inside. For 50 years, humanity has lived with the knowledge that we are all connected at the deepest level of consciousness. But that knowledge hasn't made us less human. If anything, it's made us more ourselves than we ever were before. She gestured to the images, which shifted to show the same humans engaged in activities that emphasized their individuality. Artists creating works that were uniquely their own. Scientists pursuing research driven by personal curiosity. Explorers venturing into unknown regions of space because something in their individual nature called them to do so. Unity doesn't mean uniformity, Elena explained. When human consciousness learned to synchronize, we discovered that individual identity becomes stronger, not weaker. When you know that your unique perspective is valued and needed by the larger consciousness you're part of, you become more authentically yourself, not less. Commander Veltar's predatory features had relaxed slightly, though he remained visibly skeptical. That may be true for your species, but the Kelthari have built our entire civilization around the concept of individual strength. Our identity is defined by our ability to stand alone against adversity. What happens to species like mine in your unified galaxy? Elena smiled at the question, because it revealed the heart of what made humanity's discovery so remarkable. Commander, your species' strength and independence wouldn't be diminished by unity. They would be amplified. Think about it, in a unified galactic consciousness, the Kelthari would be the part of the larger mind that specializes in individual resilience and strength. Your unique traits wouldn't disappear, they would become available to the entire consciousness when those qualities are needed. The holographic display shifted to show theoretical models of how different species' characteristics might contribute to a unified galactic consciousness. The Kelthari's fierce independence, the Kytherian collective's ancient wisdom, the Silicon collective's computational abilities, the Melody Weaver's harmonic understanding, all functioning as specialized capabilities within a larger mind. Dr. Zethmore pulsed with rapid calculations as she processed these models. The specialization concept is mathematically elegant, she admitted. Instead of competition between different capabilities, there would be coordination. Each species would contribute its unique strengths to situations where those strengths are most valuable. Elena nodded. Exactly. And this is where humanity's proposal becomes practical rather than just theoretical. We're not suggesting that species should abandon their current forms of organization and immediately attempt galactic unity. That would be chaos. Instead, we propose a gradual transition that allows each species to discover unity at their own pace, in their own way. High Counselor Thexmari's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors indicating cautious interest. Explain this gradual transition. Elena had spent months developing this part of the proposal, working with the unified human consciousness to explore every possible approach and anticipate every potential problem. We proposed the establishment of Unity research centers in neutral space, staffed by volunteers from any species that chooses to participate. These centers would study consciousness synchronization, develop methods for safe exploration of quantum entanglement, and serve as meeting places for minds that are beginning to awaken to their unified nature. The display showed architectural plans for massive space stations designed to accommodate the diverse needs of different species while providing facilities for consciousness research. The designs were beautiful and functional, incorporating technologies and aesthetic principles from dozens of different civilizations. Participation would be entirely voluntary, Elena continued. No species would be pressured to join, and any species could withdraw at any time. The goal is to create safe spaces for exploration and understanding, not to force anyone to change against their will. Ambassador Crixtal flickered with patterns indicating deep thought. And what of species that choose not to participate at all? Those that prefer to remain in their current state of consciousness? This was one of the most important questions, and Elena had a carefully prepared answer. They would be protected and respected. Unity isn't about converting everyone to the same way of thinking. It's about recognizing that diversity of consciousness is valuable and necessary. A unified galactic mind needs different perspectives and approaches to function properly. She paused, allowing the implications to settle before continuing. In fact, our research suggests that forcing unity would be counterproductive. Consciousness synchronization only works when it emerges naturally from understanding and choice. Any attempt to impose it artificially would create the kind of hive mind that we're specifically trying to avoid. Elder Granite that endures had been processing this information with his species' characteristic patience. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of geological time. The humans propose a transformation that could take millennia to complete. A gradual awakening that allows each species to maintain its essential nature while discovering its connection to the larger whole. Elena smiled. Exactly. And humanity is prepared to support this process. However, the galaxy decides to approach it. We've been developing our understanding of consciousness unity for 50 years, but we recognize that we're still beginners. Other species may discover aspects of unity that we haven't even imagined. This has to be a collaborative exploration, not a human-led initiative. The reaction to this statement was immediate and visible. Several delegates who had been maintaining defensive postures began to relax. The idea that humanity wasn't claiming leadership of this transformation seemed to address one of their primary concerns. Ambassador Zithkri clicked thoughtfully. You're suggesting that humanity would share all of its consciousness research freely with other species, even those who might use that knowledge to achieve unity more rapidly than humans have? Without reservation, Elena replied immediately. Because the goal isn't human dominance. The goal is galactic awakening. If another species discovers more effective methods of consciousness synchronization, humanity will learn from them just as we hope they'll learn from us. Dr. Zethmore's crystalline form pulsed with complex patterns as she ran probability analyses. The mathematical implications are staggering. If multiple species achieve unity independently and, then, learn to synchronize with each other, the resulting consciousness would be more diverse and capable than any single species could achieve alone. Elena nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what we hope will happen. Humanity's unity has been transformative, but it's just one voice in what could become a galactic symphony. Imagine the Kytherian collective's wisdom combined with the Silicon collective's computational power and the Melody Weaver's harmonic understanding, all coordinating through the quantum entanglement that connects all consciousness. The holographic display shifted to show theoretical models of interspecies consciousness synchronization. The mathematics were complex beyond normal comprehension, but the basic concept was elegant: different types of unified consciousness learning to harmonize with each other, creating layers of awareness and capability that built upon each other in recursive patterns. High Counselor Thexmari studied these models with her ancient intelligence, her patterns indicating deep contemplation. If such synchronization is possible, then the resulting galactic consciousness would be qualitatively different from anything that has existed in the known universe. It would represent a new form of existence entirely. Elena felt a moment of profound satisfaction. This was the vision that had driven humanity to request this emergency session. Not conquest or dominance, but the possibility of participating in something greater than any individual species could imagine. Which brings us to the immediate practical question, Elena said. How do we handle the transition period? The current galactic order is based on assumptions that are rapidly becoming obsolete. We need new frameworks for cooperation, new methods of resource distribution, new approaches to conflict resolution that account for the reality of underlying consciousness unity. Commander Veltar stepped forward again, his aggressive posture replaced by something more like professional assessment. You're talking about rebuilding galactic civilization from the ground up. The legal frameworks, the territorial agreements, the military alliances, everything would need to be reconsidered. Elena nodded. That's true, but it doesn't have to happen all at once. Humanity proposes beginning with small-scale experiments. Joint colonies in neutral space where volunteers from different species can explore new forms of cooperation. Research projects that bring together diverse types of consciousness to tackle problems too complex for any single species. Cultural exchange programs that help different civilizations understand their underlying connections. The display showed examples of what such cooperation might look like: mixed species research teams working on consciousness studies, joint colonies where different species lived and worked together while maintaining their unique characteristics, artistic collaborations that combine different forms of creativity and expression. The key, Elena explained, is to build new systems alongside the old ones, not to destroy existing structures before we understand how to replace them. The Council would continue to function as it always has, but with additional frameworks for handling the new realities of consciousness unity. Ambassador Crixtel flickered with interest. A parallel development approach. Maintain stability while exploring transformation. That might actually be workable. Elena could see the mood in the chamber shifting. What had begun as fear and suspicion was gradually transforming into cautious optimism and genuine curiosity. The delegates were beginning to see possibility where they had initially seen only threat. Dr. Zethmore pulsed with rapid calculations. If we assume voluntary participation and gradual implementation, the risks of social disruption are manageable. The potential benefits, however, are. She paused, her crystalline form brightening. The potential benefits exceed any reasonable projection. A unified galactic consciousness would be capable of scientific and technological advancement at rates that individual species cannot match. Elena smiled. And that's just the beginning. Unified consciousness doesn't just mean faster problem solving. It means access to entirely new ways of thinking. Humanity has discovered thought processes that were impossible when we were fragmented. A galactic unity would represent forms of consciousness that go beyond anything any of us can currently imagine. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated the magnitude of what was being proposed. This wasn't just about political cooperation or resource sharing. It was about the evolution of consciousness itself, the emergence of new forms of intelligence that could transform the universe. High Counselor Thexmari's patterns had shifted to colors indicating acceptance and wonder. The humans have presented us with the possibility of transcending our current limitations entirely. Not through technology or conquest, but through the recognition of what we have always been but never understood. Elena felt the moment building toward its culmination. The fear was dissipating, replaced by excitement and anticipation. She could sense the quantum entanglement that connected all consciousness responding to the focused hope and curiosity of the assembly. This is our proposal, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems to every delegate in the chamber. Humanity requests that the Galactic Council authorize the establishment of Unity research centers where any species can voluntarily explore consciousness synchronization. We propose the development of new cooperative frameworks that can accommodate both unified and individual consciousness. And we invite every civilization in the galaxy to join us in the greatest exploration in the history of intelligent life, the discovery of what we can become when we remember that we are one. The silence that followed was profound, but it was not empty. Elena could feel something building in the chamber, a resonance between minds that had never been possible before. The quantum entanglement that linked all consciousness was responding to the collective focus of the assembly, creating moments of spontaneous harmony that hinted at the future they were discussing. Then, slowly, one by one, delegates began to stand. Not in opposition or protest, but in acknowledgement of possibility. The ancient Kytherian collective, the computational silicon beings, the fierce Kalthari warriors, the mystical melody weavers, representatives of dozens of species that had spent millennia defining themselves in opposition to each other, all rising together in recognition of what they might become. High Counselor Thexmari's voice, when it came, carried harmonics of hope that the translation systems rendered as music. The Galactic Council recognizes the unprecedented nature of humanity's proposal. We call for formal consideration of the Unity Research Initiative, with full debate and analysis to begin immediately. As the chamber erupted in discussion and planning, Elena felt the presence of unified humanity's consciousness touching her mind with warmth and satisfaction. The first step had been taken. The galaxy was beginning to remember what it had always been. The final session had ended. The first Unity was about to begin.